makes you smoke too much and drink too much and kill yourself, even though mechanically it doesn't make any sense that we would do that. So he really saw the material and the mental, or the spiritual and the material, as being a different point of view. The material view he called the night view, because there was no spirit in it. It's rather dull, mechanical. The spiritual side, the mindish side of things, was called the day view. Keep that in mind. He went through, I always like these guys who have mental breakdowns. Remind me of myself. You know, in the middle of his life, he really got, in a way, I guess, you might say, I think the book hints at this as well, that this idea of like how to understand who we are and how we're put together was troubling him so much. He also had a serious accident trying to look at an eclipse of the sun and hurt his eyes. I think that also may have figured into it. And had what used to be called a nervous breakdown. Was bedridden for a while. And then when he was sitting there and he was meditating, I guess, who knows what he was meditating, we can't know that for sure. But somehow he woke up and he was kind of motivated by a new scientific problem. And that kind of spun him off in the rest of his career to do some of the things that we're talking about today. The problem that he was meditating on was this mind-body problem. How does the mind get to know the world when they're two different things? How do they come together? And even what we get from Helmholtz, all we really know is that the body's distorting things in the sensory organs. And yet the mind puts things together. What's going on? How does that work? Why aren't we crazier than we are? If our minds are all over here and our bodies are down there, how do they come together? I mean, we know they do, but what's the explanation? That's what gets him going. When he goes to the lab, what he ends up studying are stimulus intensities. That's studying the energy that Helmholtz was talking about and looking at how the energy in the world around us varies and how we pick that up. So, for example, the book tells you, consider, a pin dropping, right? Or looking at a star at a distance, or looking at a lit match in a dark room, or looking at a lit match in a not so dark room, or a star on a clear night versus a star on a cloudy night. Or seeing one star as opposed to many stars. What Fechner notices is that the stimulus intensity varies depending on the situation. It's not just determined by the energy that's there in the star or the match or the pin dropping. The energy is interpreted by our bodies in a different way depending on the context. Looking at one star in a dark night stands out, looks really bright. Right? If it's Christmas night, we'll think all kinds of mystical things about it. Looking at a bright star on a busy night with a lot of stars, it might not look, the same star might not look that bright. Pin drop, like in this classroom where it's so quiet, right? You'll hear it. Pin drop, when the traffic's outside, you're not going to hear it. Same pin, same sound, different response on the inside. Fechner talked about this as the distinction between the physical stimulus and the subjective experience. You'll see they'll use in the book P and S, which stands for physical stimulus versus subjective experience. What he does is he actually starts to think, and I guess this is what he must have been thinking when he was laying in bed there. A lot of good things happen in bed. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I said that. Anyway, it wasn't a dirty joke. Descartes lays in bed, Fechner's in bed. They all have good ideas. I actually think I do my best thinking. Next class, I'll come in my pajamas and sit here and talk to you. But what he must have been thinking about was he had a friend whose name was Weber, Ernst Weber, and Weber was a physicist who started to play around and notice just what I was describing, that what we respond to is not just the absolute stimulus, the absolute sound or the absolute light, but it's relative. It's relative to its background. The way Fechner and Weber put it was that we don't respond to the absolute stimulus, we respond to a ratio. That is the sound of the stimulus on, with a line, and then underneath is the sound of the background. And whether the sound is loud or soft is going to be a function of how much that background is there. So that's what kind of gets him going. And Weber had actually done the studies looking at when people notice difference in stimulus. And he was doing things with weight, so you pick up something, and you say, all right, yeah, I got it. Then you pick up something else, and you had to make a judgment as to whether or not the second thing was different than the first. That judgment, the short term for that is JND, or just noticeable difference. And that's what Weber was looking at. And that's where he noticed that, for example, if you pick up something that's 100 grams, and then you give somebody something that's 101 grams, they don't notice the difference. And then you give them something, you pick up 100 again, then you give them 102 grams, they don't notice the difference. And then you give them some, pick up the 100 again, give them 103 grams, they go, different, I got it, it's heavier. Then you give them 103 grams, give them 104, nothing, 105, nothing, 106, different. So Weber comes out and says that basically what we need is a 3% difference for our bodies to actually notice it. So in a way, he's suggesting that there's a mathematical relationship between what goes on in the world around us and what our body actually picks up. It's not one-to-one. Every time the world changes, we don't notice. If you go from 100 grams to 101 grams, no different. Or if you go from 10 units of light to 11 units of light, no difference. You have to go 3%. And that's where you'll see a person making a difference or discriminating with regard to a just noticeable difference. It's not a direct response to the absolute stimulus, but it's a relative judgment based on how much change is occurring. And Weber estimated it at about 3%. Anyway, Fechner goes to his lab, and he starts doing his own experiments, playing around with the same idea. But he starts to think that there's probably a different ratio for different sensations and for different parts of our body. And so he starts doing experiments where he kind of starts from scratch rather than start with 100 grams. He begins to look and see how much energy is needed for us to first notice that something's there. And he does these things with light. And if you have a small amount of light, kind of neutral background far enough away, it's very likely we won't see it. If he increases it a little, we still may not see it. If he increases a little bit more, we may not see it. Then he'll get right to the point and we'll go, got it. When we can see that light 50% of the time that it's on, he calls it the absolute threshold. That's the point at which we notice that something's out there. That becomes the 0 point. And then he says, okay, now let's look for the JND. And he turns it up a little bit, no difference. Turns it up a little bit, no difference. Turns it up a little bit more. Got it, it changed. There it goes. Then he goes again, and he charts this. And what he finds is that there is a clean mathematical relationship between the physical stimulus and the subjective experience. It's not like the mind and the body are going in crazy order, but rather they're moving together. Kind of a little bit like you might think Leibniz would say, moving stride by stride, and the link between them is not the real world, but the mathematical link between the two. Okay? And the book talks a little bit about this, and actually gives a chart of that in there. Fechner wrote about this in a book called Elements of Psychophysics, made him popular. He talked a lot about this mathematical relationship. I mean, in a way, what he did, I think what people saw, was he solved the mind-body problem. Okay? And the question was, what links the mind to the world around it? You know, Descartes said the pineal gland. Other people had different ideas. Here, Fechner's come in and saying it's mathematical, which actually Plato would be pleased to hear, because he kind of thought that was always the case. The truth is in the numbers, not in what we think we're experiencing. Okay? Okay, and that's not it. Fechner's a little bit short, but again, understand and read through exactly what he did. Now, after that, and we're doing pretty good. Although I feel, I just looked at the time. We haven't been here that long. My throat's telling me I've been talking for 2 hours. But anyway, the rest of that chapter talks about some of the people that were influenced by Fechner and Helmholtz. Neither one of them are considered psychologists at this point. The major person who gets influenced by them is the subject of the next chapter that we'll do right after the break. I'll be cured, my refrigerator will be working, and my room will be clean. And we'll talk about the birth of psychology with Wilhelm Wundt. in Leipzig, Germany. He takes what Fechner and Helmholtz